Hey guys, welcome back. Besiege early access coverage. This is episode 12. I'm Enigmas, and today we're experimenting with different things. Ultimately, we're going to get to tossing some things at some things, hopefully to destroy some things. But I've been messing around with different ways of moving things around. You can see here we've got this sort of arm thing. It's rotating at the top, and then it connects to another arm with a swivel. And then between the two arms and this one steering block, it's just this one little block going around in the same block space, we get a very wide range of motion. Here's another example of the same concept done vertically instead of horizontally, and it works a lot better. It's just, the other one was a little bit sloppy. This one is quite smooth. You see the wheel going back and forth. It's a fairly wide range of motion considering the thing that's moving that's causing that to happen is just a little steering block that sits in a one block space and moves an arm that moves an arm that moves a wheel. It's something to keep in mind for future designs, basically, is what it comes down to. So the central theme, I guess, that you'll see here is the whole idea of connecting arms on swivels and making things happen on a much larger scale at one end than they did at the beginning. So with this sort of thing in mind, you can see I built sort of a catapult. And this one is actually operated with pistons. Instead of a spring, we did a catapult a while back with a spring. And I'm not trying to play any funny games or anything. The other one worked a lot better, but the sheep are angry. We set the sheep on fire, and they're angry. There's only so much you can do against the coming of the sheep army. We built a catapult previously that used springs, a very, very simple way of causing the arm to lift up and over very rapidly, and we got some good distance, relatively speaking, with the boulders that we were throwing. But this is just experimenting with this whole idea of a relatively small range of motion translating to a much larger range of motion. You can see here, this is basically another design using pistons, slightly different orientation, a total of 3 pistons, which gives us a 3 block length range of motion on the bottom and translates to a full arc at the arm up top. So to give you an idea of how that goes together, we're going to do a build that kind of demonstrates that whole idea. Basically, again, using pistons ultimately to produce a range of motion. That it's a lot easier to manage ultimately when it's built, and the only thing you have to worry about is whether or not your machine can actually stand up to the stresses without pulling itself apart, which is not necessarily always the easiest thing to do. So we start off, as always, with a base, and in this case we're using wood. We're going to be using a fair bit of wood in the structure, not so much in the mechanisms. Still like to steer away from wood in the mechanisms, but the structure itself can benefit from a fairly healthy amount of wood with the appropriate amount of braces. All in all, this is not necessarily going to be complex. It's just going to be a little bit more involved than, say, a catapult that uses springs for the full range of motion. So you can see here we've got a couple of posts. We put a swivel on either side, and then when we connect them, whether we use just a brace across or whether we use the ballast block like we just put in there, brace it all up. It's a point. It's basically a pivot point that the arm that will eventually be lobbing whatever the boulders or the flaming boulders will be swinging around. And then all we have to do is have something attached to the other end that's creating the motion that swings the arm, and it doesn't have to be a very long range of motion in order to get a full swing. The idea being from there, if you can make that short range of motion very quickly with whatever device you have access to, you'll end up with a faster range of motion on the arm, which means you're going to throw things farther, which may or may not be beneficial, because sometimes you don't necessarily need to lob them across the world. You just need to get them from your machine to the hut in front of your machine. So here we're just basically building that whole kind of pivot point armature, and this point down here where we just put the second ballast block is going to be where we connect the pistons or the springs or whatever is going to be causing that motion. And then off the other side, you'll see momentarily is where we start putting in the arm. And again, using ballast blocks as temporary blocks to build back the arm, and then using braces for most of the final arm structure, just to save on weight, and ideally, try and come up with the strongest structure possible. And it's always a balance. I don't know necessarily that braces are stronger than wood, for example, but I'm pretty sure they're much lighter, and that's why they tend to survive a little bit better, is because they don't have their own weight that is kind of stressing them out and making them want to fly apart. So you can see we've got ballast blocks. We'll get our holder in place that holds whatever, the boulder, the flaming boulder, whatever we want to use for a projectile. And then we can remove all but one of the ballast blocks and put in the braces that are necessary to hold everything together. So a lot of temporary blocks, but once you get used to using temporary blocks, it's really not that difficult. Most of the time, it's just what I'm finding is learning how things interact with one another, and based on that, where they have to be placed so that everything works. I find a lot of times I don't give myself enough space to build everything that I need, or I give myself space, but I need space in different sections, like different areas than what I gave myself. It's a learning process, so that's why we do this. And you can kind of see what I'm talking about now. It's got the arm that's on the swivels, and we just have to figure out a way to make it move. So just to keep things familiar, this is where I kind of decided, you know what, let's see what we can do with just the contractible springs like we used in the previous catapult. It's easy to place them. It's easy to operate them. The limitation, of course, is that you don't really have any control of it going the other way. So if you overswing, you won't be able to get the catapult arm back. If you had a reloading mechanism, you'd have to come up with some other way to get the arm back into a loading position. But for this, I mean, it's not even really that much of a consideration. We aren't going to be building any kind of reloading mechanism for this. It's just messing around with the basic firing mechanism. And reloading can be done very, very quickly with the space bar. So just apply the key bindings to the springs, something simple. In this case, we're using one. And this kind of thing, because the arm is on a swivel, and in this case, especially because it's on springs, is if we were to just start the simulation now, that arm would want to drop down to the ground. Of course, weight plus gravity equals broken machine, as things usually work out. So the easiest way to limit that, not necessarily stop it, but to limit it, is to build a post underneath the arm so that the ballast block that's holding the holder has something to land on that's, you know, just a little bit below where the ballast block starts out. And then we don't have to worry so much about impact and things pulling on other things before we've even had a chance to settle into the simulation and decide exactly what we want to do next. In addition, it's very important to brace it up. And I want to encourage you to watch the wooden structure along the ground when we first start it and fire it, and watch how it like arches, because we haven't braced it nearly as much as we would need to. But when we actually fire something, we'll put a flaming ball inside the holder. But when we actually get started, watch how the whole thing just arches. It's actually almost terrifying because it looks like it's about to snap in half, but it doesn't. Somehow it survives and lives to do nothing another day. What more can you say about it? A little bit of armor, not that it matters. But I mean, that's enough to get a test in. You can at least see if the armor is going to hold up. You see how the whole thing just kind of lifts and then lifts the other way, and then things start breaking. Braces. You can never have too many braces. And in this case, it's not a particularly complicated or time-consuming brace job. We're just reinforcing everything and trying to encourage it all to sit flat. You can see it's not throwing far, it's not throwing fast. We don't have a lot of control over it. And like I said, with the springs, the arm goes all the way over, and then you have no way of getting it back to its start position. You have to basically restart the simulation, which in this case is not that much of an issue. But if we were talking about a machine that we wanted to be able to fire multiple projectiles, it would be kind of a problem. Because we pull the springs out, and now we're going to set it up with pistons. And the nice thing about pistons is it's a limited range of motion that we can control. And if we kind of are a little bit careful about how we set things up, we can ensure that the arm will only swing forward a certain amount, and then it can be pulled back by the pistons retracting to their start position. So the main thing to keep in mind with pistons is that they're a little bit springy. They're not like the piston that you might expect in your car, where it has an extremely limited range of motion. It moves in one direction, and then it moves in the opposite direction, and then back in the one direction, the opposite direction. These things, they have a little bit of flex to them, and the more they flex, the more chance that things are going to break apart. So we want to be aware of that, and we want to be aware of our options to control that. And really the easiest way to do that is there's a block called a slider, and it's basically a wooden block on a pair of metal rails, and you can attach it to the piston. When the piston extends, the wooden block slides along the rails with it, and then when the piston retracts, the wooden block slides back with it, and it just adds rigidity to the piston when you attach the wooden block to the piston head, and gives you an opportunity to kind of keep things from getting completely out of control. So we're using just 2 pistons, which is going to give us the travel distance of 2 blocks. When we extend them, we're just going to set them all to the same keybind, and I'm using 2 sets of pistons because I want that strength of being able to, pull this arm around, because it's got a heavy boulder that's on fire on a long arm. Physics says it's going to take a certain amount of effort, so to speak, to make that thing go over. So we're doubling up on the pistons and then using 2 with each set so that we get that extra distance, and it should be enough to at least get the arm straight up and down, and then hopefully the projectile keeps going, and then you lower the arm back into its regular start position. Simple and straightforward, right? Sometimes things don't always work that way, but again, it's a great learning opportunity. I've seen people doing all kinds of crazy stuff with articulated arms like this that have multiple swivel joints in them. They can go around and do all kinds of stuff. I saw one with a guy that did like a walking leg with all of these articulated things. And it wasn't, perfect human walking leg, but it was still a leg that was walking back and forth. And it was pretty much made all out of braces and ballast blocks and little swivels and steering blocks. It was fantastic. So we did the unthinkable. And we did a single arm that moves back and forth with a wheel on it. That was our thing. And now we're translating it into a catapult that doesn't really do a very good job, but we'll learn something from the experience. I swear, the next episode, one way or the other, it's going to be all about velocity. It's all going to be about the spectacular launch. Whether it's accurate, reusable, or anything like that, doesn't matter. We're going to go for as much speed as we can get, without going into hiding for 3 months learning how to make it happen. Just to make up for the last episode with the lobber and its 3 frames per second trying to do anything useful. And in this case, where we're kind of limited in terms of what we can do based on the system that we built. You can't blame it on anything else. It's just the way that we built things and not necessarily having time to refine them. But in this case, those 2 blocks that I just placed are ball joints, which is not the same as a swivel joint, obviously, but it gives us a little bit of a range of motion where the braces are going to connect from the arm with the swivel there to the pistons, so that things, again, aren't too rigid and ripping themselves apart when they move around. And we're also, I forgot to lower it down, but you get the idea here. You've seen the whole thing now built from start to finish. It survived, except that I forgot to do the key bindings on the pistons, and I was pushing the button wondering why don't the pistons move, because I was pressing the wrong button. And I should also lower it to the ground too, because that impact is not our friend. But you can see now, not bad, right? It's enough to clear. Oh, the sheep. They're so angry. You get the idea. It was an experiment. It worked out. The sheep are 2. We have 0 points in the war, but we're going to be back next episode, all about fast things to kill things faster and aren't slow. So if you want to be notified when I add that video, you can subscribe to my channel and follow me on social media. Links for that in the information section below the video. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.